Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? We're going back to the X-Men. It always comes back to the X-Men, right? Well, this time we're going to go kind of far back, actually. We're going back to April of 1983 with Uncanny X-Men number 168. So just before we get into it, if you enjoy the channel, if you feel like you might want to help out a little bit, what you can do is in the description, there's a link to my Patreon. And if you subscribe there, that'll give you access to everything I do from the Blood Force pages and the comics to the YouTube videos before they get uploaded to YouTube, as well as some Patreon exclusive content. So this is a run that I've been looking forward to getting to. This is the Paul Smith run from issue 160. Well, it starts really in issue 167. I couldn't really get that one though, but it runs up until issue 175. It's really not a long run at all, but I mean, it is to me kind of formative, which is kind of the point of this series, or was at some point anyway. And you might ask, how is that possible? In April of 1983, you would have been 4. Well, in September of, I want to say, 91, around there anyway. My memory back then is a little hazy. My mom enrolled me in a cartooning class for after school, because she was always looking for activities and shit, right? And that particular class wasn't really useful in any way in terms of teaching me how to draw. However, there was a kid there who was into comics, and one time brought in the From the Ashes trade paperback, which is an awesome trade and has like a spectacular Art Adams cover and everything. And the run of comics that it reprints is the run that we're going to do, for a little while going forward. So issue 168 to issue 176. And you may have noticed I'm not doing dedicated weeks anymore to a specific book. That ship has sailed, I think. So what I'll do is I'll just do this, like I'll do an Uncanny book once every 2 weeks. I think that's a pretty good schedule. But yeah, anyway, so that From the Ashes trade, I borrowed that off that kid, and that was really my first experience with the X-Men. And it's an interesting period to look at, because it feels like there's a lot of shit happens in those like 9 issues. You introduce the Morlocks, you get the shit with Rogue's face turn, you get Wolverine trying to get married, and you get the introduction of Madeline Pryor. That's an awful lot for less than a year. Okay, so the backstory on this is the New Mutants graphic novel came out about a year prior to this, and we're just kicking up the regular season. They've guest starred in a couple of issues before this, and Chris Claremont is writing both of them concurrently, so he's going to work them into the plot a little bit so there's a little bit of cross-pollination. If you're going to have multiple X books, you need to be able to have them kind of play off of each other. So let's get into the cover here. First, this one is going to focus largely on Shadowcat, who, has been on the team, kind of, for like 3 years or so, but she's still, the kid of the group, and she hasn't, there may be a bit of a feeling that she hasn't 100% proven herself. And I like this cover a lot. It's fairly simple, but it's memorable. And that's, an awful lot of Paul Smith's style can kind of be summed up that way, really. Paul Smith came from animation before he got into comics. And Uncanny, it wasn't his first work with Marvel, but it was pretty early on in his career. And we can see from the cover on this already that he's got a pretty good design sense. So that'll be interesting to look out for as we go in. And this, of course, is the famous Professor Xavier is a Jerk issue, which I think we've probably all seen before. I like all the little touches, just to add a little bit of realism to this, believability. Just the details on things like the clothes, and the doorknob here, the door frame. It all lends kind of a perfect sense of place. And it's funny, on the live stream earlier today, we were discussing who does good hair. You could do worse than Paul Smith's hair, to be honest. So, Shadowcat's problem is that now that there's this, like, X-Men Junior team, and she still hasn't 100% proven herself to Professor Xavier, who I believe has largely been kind of MIA recently. I haven't read very much at all of the issues before this, but I got that impression reading this issue. So he hasn't seen a lot of her in action, so he doesn't really know whether or not she belongs in the field. So he's reassigned her from the X-Men to the New Mutants, where she can hang out with kids more her own age and, learn more about her powers and get some proper schooling and all that kind of stuff. Of course, Shadowcat's problem is that she's already been out in the field and she feels that she's proven herself enough. And she's a kid, some grown-up coming along telling her, you can't do the grown-up things. That doesn't sit well with her. And she's going to complain to Magic about this, Ilyana, who points out immediately that, he's treating you like a child because you're acting like one. And that maybe your life ain't so fucking hard, considering Ilyana spent half her life in a demonic limbo. That's, just to put things in perspective a little bit. And we get that simplistic style in these faces, where Paul Smith boils down the details, but it still looks kind of great. And I like some basic things here, like Ilyana's pose here. It's very, it's small, but it's naturalistic. And that is a bit of an element that Paul Smith would bring, is just like, he had a good grasp of posture. And we're going to get some cuts to some close-ups of some alien eyes that are hungering. You might recognize this here already, but this is Lockheed, which becomes Shadowcat's pet dragon. Well, he joins her as, kind of her pet. This isn't the first appearance of Lockheed, but we're only like a couple of issues away from it. And from here, we'll cut to Nightcrawler and Wolverine having a discussion about Shadowcat. And Wolverine's really on Shadowcat's side in this. He's seen her in action. He knows that she can hold her own, so he thinks Xavier is being unreasonable. Nightcrawler's playing more devil's advocate, appropriately maybe. And more of that background style, just not going overboard with details, just kind of basic but believable. So Nightcrawler is, for the sake of argument, backing up Xavier's position that, she's a kid and they don't really have the right to put her in danger. When she's older, sure, but maybe, for now she should be kept out of harm's way a bit. But ultimately he does agree with Logan that, she's already ready for the team. And we got Paul Smith's close-up version of Logan here, which isn't my favorite one, but I like the fact that he looks different from everybody else. He doesn't look like a teenager like some of these guys do. He looks like an older dude, which is kind of his role at this point. He's almost like a uncle or, older cousin kind of character in this. So from their discussion, we're going to move to Charles Xavier. So the deal right now with Xavier is that he's had a clone body built that doesn't have destroyed legs and had his mind placed within that. So theoretically, he should be able to walk. The problem is that when he was younger, his legs were crushed. It's not that he's paraplegic. It's that his legs are in constant pain, and his telepathy actually blocks out the pain from his legs. But the problem with that is that now that he's in this new body, he's got this kind of psychosomatic thing where he can't convince his brain that his legs are fine now. And he just can't quite will himself to walk. He's trying. It's interesting seeing him have his own kind of struggles. I don't remember seeing that too often in the X-Men book, where you got to see more of Charles Xavier having just his own thing he's trying to do. And of course, he can't keep his legs under him. He's fully aware that, this absolutely should work. And of course, Lilandra is watching over him while he does it. So Lilandra is responsible for his clone body, and she's kind of the focus for Xavier at this point. And she's, of course, the rightful heir of the Shi'ar Empire, if we haven't mentioned that before. And Xavier mentions here that he can will his legs to move properly, but it takes all of his concentration to the point where it renders him useless as a telepath, which feels like a bit of where they got the idea from for the Days of Future Past movie. And they're at a bit of an impasse in their relationship because Lilandra needs to go back to the Shi'ar Empire to resume her place on the throne, and Xavier needs to stay behind on Earth because he's the only person who's capable of finding and training mutants and, has any kind of place for them. Not to mention the fact he mentions that the last time he went out into space in the Shi'ar Empire, he got Jean Grey killed. And that really wasn't too long before this. Maybe 3 years. I think even less than that, actually. And before we leave Charles and Lilandra, the book reminds us that Lockheed is still watching and waiting and is hungry. So now we're going to cut to Stevie Hunter's dance studio. Stevie Hunter's a character I'm not really familiar with, having not read the previous issues to this. And Kitty's too worked up about all this Xavier stuff to be able to dance properly. So she's going to get chewed out by Stevie, who tells her basically to stop sulking and just kind of take her lumps. This is your new situation, but moping doesn't help you any. You can't change your circumstances. All you can change is your response, right? Which maybe sounds like a cliche, but it's a good thing to put in a kid's book in 1983, I feel like. So from there, we're going to cut to Storm, who has recently been declared as leader of the X-Men. And she's finally returned to Earth. She's been out in space for months, or maybe a year or so. The Shi'ar thing took a long time. I've never really been a big fan of the X-Men in space. Every once in a while, sure. But, I don't feel any need to go back to it. I think part of it is the Dave Cockrum art. I can't get into it. So Storm's going to go outside and appreciate some Earth weather first thing in the morning. And she drops her bathrobe and is full on naked for Mother Nature. And Mother Nature goes, blah! And hits her back with an immediate storm. And Storm, of course, wonders what that could possibly mean. Why nature is all of a sudden rejecting her. And again, I like Paul Smith's version of Storm. It's a good, simple look, but she does look different from any of the other women we've seen so far. He seems to be pretty good at keeping track of facial features. So now we're going to switch to Kitty trying to convince Xavier that she deserves to be on the team. First, she's going to try this with logic. So, pleading her case and beating him at chess. Next, she's going to try just overwhelming him with emotion. And she's going to suck up to him with flattery and just helping out everywhere. And none of it really gets her anywhere. So from there, we're going to cut now to Cyclops, actually. Cyclops is down in Florida, and he's hanging out with his father Corsair and his brother Havoc. I believe this is in a time not too long after he discovered Corsair was his father. So he's exploring the possibility that he's got family now, where he's got grandparents who might still be alive. So a whole family when he got raised as an orphan. And while he's in Florida, he's checking in with an old friend I don't recognize. Her name is Lee, and they have some kind of romantic connection. But Scott he's a little bit standoffish because she's freaked out by him telling her stories about being in space and, planets exploding and shit. And if that's going to be a problem, then he doesn't really want to have to put her in a position where she might be worried about him or she might be in danger. You never know. But it's a good way to kind of frame Scott as an eligible bachelor. Because, up until now, he's been in a relationship with Jean, right? And then you got to go through that mourning period. And then, okay, we're in a new state now. And one thing that really stands out to me is just how many plot threads Chris Claremont is juggling here. This is essentially downtime for the X-Men. Cyclops is off in Florida. Wolverine's going to head up to Canada to just get away from people for a while. Nightcrawler's going to hang out with his girlfriend, teleport into her apartment and set up candles and shit. And you get the slightly creepy Claremont yum when one of the characters likes how another one looks. And Kitty's stuck in her room doing her homework. Colossus and Magic invite her out to hang out while they chop wood. Again, why not? It's the 80s. There's no internet. There's no video games. You can watch TV, I suppose, but you get the feeling there's not a lot of that in the X-Mansion. So she declines because she does still have to finish her homework. If she doesn't finish that up, then that just gives Professor X another reason to say, nope, you're not ready to hang with the adults. So she gets back to her computer and just takes a look around at who's in the X-Mansion. Notices Professor Xavier and Lilandra, but also notices there's some kind of anomaly in the maintenance tunnels under the mansion. Always like this old ad. There's a bunch of old ads in here that it's like, hey, I remember you. So Shadowcat's going to put on her old uniform from when she first started with the X-Men. But she doesn't really feel it's that special anymore because this is now the New Mutants uniform, which she thinks of as the X-Babies. So she's not going to go by the elevator or anything. She's just going to phase through most of the mansion here, go right down to the tunnels. All of the lights are off, even though she tried to turn them on remotely. Turns out some of the cables have been chewed through. She's able to contact Xavier telepathically so he can kind of monitor the situation at least. He doesn't detect anything nearby, but he still thinks maybe she should wait until somebody like Colossus can come down to help out in case something dangerous happens. She figures, if you don't detect anything, we're probably okay. And it turns out the anomaly here looks like it's Lockheed, who she recognizes, so she did meet him when he showed up in 166, which is just 2 issues before this. And his home planet got destroyed. And Kitty's happy to see him because she thought maybe he went with it. But then we see that there was more than one anomaly because there's these things here that are called Sidrian Hunters. They're explained here as the aliens who tried to kill Scott's father months ago and wrecked this mansion in the process. And Professor Xavier tells her to get the hell out of here. And she's about to when she gets blasted by this Sidrian Hunter thing here. Decent enough early 80s design for the Hunters that, look kind of like simplified giant bugs, really. So after the shot from the Sidrian Hunter, she tries to get out of there, but it's kind of fried her synapses a little bit where she can't get her phasing ability to work. So now we're going to get Shadowcat in a situation where she's not able to use her powers. Is she going to be any use? And at least Wolverine has been training her on hand-to-hand combat. So now she's going to get to put that to the test. Got to bust out some moves on the Hunters here. Lockheed's going to do what he can. Xavier figures out that these are hatchlings. They're not mature Hunters, whatever those are. And that a nest must have been established during their initial attack. He does advise that they're vulnerable to heat, but Lockheed's figured that part out already. Xavier asks her who Lockheed is, and she's like, my dragon. You're what? I'll explain later. Takes another blast from the Sidrian Hunter. It's probably a good thing that these are hatchlings and aren't able to give her a full power blast. So her and Lockheed have been able to take care of a couple of them. She's holding her own, but she's getting a little shredded up in the process. So basically putting her in the situation she was in on the cover here. Pretty exactly, really. One of the Hunters lets off another shot, but Colossus has already heard Xavier's telepathic command, most likely, and is able to jump in front of it. And this Hunter thing can't do much to Colossus. Like maybe if he just sat there and took it eventually, but he's just going to walk in and pound on the thing. I like Paul Smith's version of Colossus. He does some pretty good stuff with the musculature here, and I don't know, just kind of like some nice, subtle stuff with the metal shinies. So now that they've taken care of those, they just need to find the nest, but turns out Lockheed already took care of it. He was hungry after all, so he just went in, fried everything, and ate it. So no more Sidrian Hunter problem. So back upstairs, Colossus is back in his normal form. Shadowcat explains to Xavier who Lockheed is and that he's going to be basically her companion going forward. And Xavier was impressed by how Kitty handled herself in the tunnels. It's just a minor threat, but it's enough now that he's seen her in action, because this is kind of the first time that he's starting to rethink his decision. So as long as she can keep her grades up and not put herself into dangerous situations, Xavier thinks that she can be part of the X-Men on a probationary basis, which is more than enough for Shadowcat. And then we're going to end with Scott landing in Alaska, which is where he was going to be headed after Florida. This is where Scott's grandparents live, and he's going to be met here on the last page by someone who looks extremely familiar, which is Madeline Pryor. And they go to the point of explaining that not only the hair, obviously, but her face and voice sound the same, which is good to point out because it'd be very different artist. The last time we saw Jean Grey would have been drawn by Dave Cockrum. So if you explicitly state she looks and sounds exactly like Jean Grey, okay, then so it's not just another redhead, and that's creepy. And then we're going to get to some Shadowcat costumes that were submitted by the looks of it back when the character was first created. Like, what kind of costume should she have? And these are the examples we get. And the costume she's going to go with going forward isn't really too much like any of these. There's little bits and pieces that are maybe kind of similar. But unfortunately, they do go with the green, which is not a good look. But, what can you do? So that's it for X-Men 168. So that sets us up in an interesting way for the next issue, really. It's really what this particular issue is. It's a setup book. It gets Wolverine away from the comic for an issue or two. It sets up Shadowcat as being pretty much a full member of the team. And it starts this whole thing with Cyclops and Madeline Pryor. So the Scott and Madeline thing and Wolverine are going to be major plot points going forward. Combine those with what we're going to start in the next issue with the Morlocks. And we're actually going to have a pretty full plate in terms of stories for most of the rest of the year. One thing Claremont was particularly good at was setting up dangling threads. And then whenever you need to start up a new storyline, there's always all sorts of leftovers. Just from these little nuggets that he leaves all throughout the stories. Things like Storm being refused by nature. It's like half a page in total. But that's the kind of thing he can spin into like a couple of issues worth if he needs to later. A lot of them ended up turning into nothing. But there's so much sprinkled over, 15, 20 years worth of comics that theoretically there should have been a gold mine for anybody coming after him. But I think 4 or 5 dangling plot threads is going to be enough for today. So that's going to do it for this one. Thanks very much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notification so you know when the next one's coming out. Go and subscribe on my Patreon. That'll give you access to everything I do, from the Blood Force stuff to the YouTube stuff before it comes out on YouTube, as well as some Patreon exclusive content. You can also follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions. Let me know if you have any particular memories about the Paul Smith era, what you thought of his style. Assuming you're not too familiar. A lot of you probably are, but And I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, bye-bye.